I recently uploaded a video here on YouTube showing you what it was like for me to spend 24 hours on board Brilliant Lady, the new cruise ship from Virgin Voyages. I was invited to spend some time on board while she was docked in Portsmouth in England, ahead of her transatlantic crossing to New York City, which is where she would then begin officially cruising from. In that video, I showed you my cabin for the night, I showed you the entertainment that I experienced, the food that I ate, I showed you generally around some of the venues on the ship, and I also showed you some of the cabins which were open for viewing while I was on board. One of them, which I thought might attract a fair bit of attention, was this huge Rockstar suite, and the other, which I didn't expect to attract quite as much attention, was a brand new grade of cabin that hasn't been seen before on any other Virgin Voyages cruise ship. And that brings me to what we're going to talk about today in this video. In this video, I'm going to share with you everything there is to know about a totally new type of cabin that's only available on board Brilliant Lady. I'll share with you why this ship and none of the others has this type of cabin. I'll also share with you what I thought about it, and I'll also share with you some of the top things that I think you really need to think about if you're even considering booking one of these cabins for your future cruise. If you do enjoy this video and if you find it useful, then it would be great if you would think about supporting my channel by clicking both the thumbs up and the subscribe buttons. Now let's get started on the cabin. If you haven't figured it out already, the cabin that we're going to be talking about today is the Sea Terrace, slightly smaller balcony cabin. Before we get into the detail of the room itself, let's start by talking about why Brilliant Lady has this type of cabin, but none of the other ships in the Virgin Voyages fleet do. Well, it all comes down to the itinerary and how the itinerary has then impacted a few parts of the ship design. When you look at the routes that Scarlet Lady, Valiant Lady and Resilient Lady have been completing since launch, they have, generally speaking, gone between Europe and the US. The side of the US that those ships have generally stuck to is the East Coast, and that straight away is where Brilliant Lady is going to differ. During her first season, she is going to move from the Caribbean and the East Coast of the USA over to the West Coast, which is when she'll then take in places like Alaska, for example. Now, in order for the ship to get from the east to the west, there is one obvious obstacle that's in the middle there, and that is the Panama Canal. Brilliant Lady has had to be designed in a way that will allow her to easily pass through the Panama Canal, for the simple reason that the alternative to the Panama Canal just isn't worth thinking about, because that's a long shipping route that would take a really long time. And the Panama Canal in itself is considered a bucket list item for so many cruisers. Now, that doesn't mean that Brilliant Lady has been designed as an entirely different cruise ship to the other cruise ships in the fleet. In fact, quite the opposite. Brilliant Lady is such a similar cruise ship to Scarlet, Valiant and Resilient. The main difference with Brilliant is that in order to make her a little thinner to get through the Panama Canal, they've had to adjust how they house the lifeboats. That means that the lifeboats on the side of the ship, on the other three ships, will hang off the side a little more than they do on Brilliant Lady. They're just a little bit more tucked in on this new ship. That means that what was in the space that was available above those lifeboats on the other three ships, that's now gone because the lifeboat sits much closer in. I'm hoping that overview or that description makes sense. There are a number of cabins, 80 in fact, which have now been impacted on deck 8 of the ship by these lifeboats moving in slightly. I'll give you the numbers of those cabins shortly, but first, let me show you the Panama Canal, because this is absolutely amazing. I've been fortunate enough to experience the Panama Canal twice. Once on board Cunard's Queen Elizabeth, and second on board Holland America Line's Rotterdam. Rotterdam is a much bigger cruise ship than Queen Elizabeth, meaning that she had to pass through the new lock system, which is much bigger, built for the more modern ships of today, whereas Queen Elizabeth was able to pass through the old lock system. In fact, she is one of the largest cruise ships that can fit through the old locks. Both of those experiences were absolutely amazing to see, and I would really, really recommend it to anyone. If you've never seen the Panama Canal, please think about adding it onto your bucket list. Anyway, back to Brilliant Lady. So, where exactly are these 80 cabins that are being sold as sea terrace, slightly smaller balcony cabins? Well, you'll find 52 of them around the forward stairwell. In other words, around the staircase at the front of the ship, and you'll find 28 of them around the aft stairwell, or the stairwell at the back of the ship. You'll find them really clearly annotated on the Brilliant Lady deck plan on the Virgin Voyages website. The specific cabin numbers go from 8034 A and Z, so port and starboard, to 8086 A and Z at the back of the ship, and when you look at the front of the ship, the cabins affected go from 8214 A and Z to 8314 A and Z. I know, that was a lot of numbers and a lot of A's and a lot of Z's. Let me quickly explain to you the concept of the A and the Z on board Virgin. Virgin Voyages have done away with some elements of nautical speak on board their ships. For example, port and starboard aren't a thing when you get up to the passenger cabin decks. One side of the ship is labelled A, the other is labelled Z, and you'll find that the numbers of cabins duplicate all the way down, making it really easy. So if you're in cabin 8041A, there might also be an 8041, but it'll be a Z. So as much as that sounds quite complicated to begin with, it's actually pretty simple. Now let's move on to look at the 6 things that I think you need to be thinking about if you're considering cruising in this type of cabin in the future. Up first, this cabin is exactly the same on the inside as what you'll find in a regular sea terrace cabin elsewhere on the ship. That means that the experience inside the cabin itself is not going to change at all. If you book one of these slightly smaller balcony cabins, the change comes when you go outside. And that brings us on to number 2. The second thing that you need to be thinking about is the fact that this balcony is not just smaller, it's a lot smaller than what you get in a regular sea terrace. That means that it might impact the amount of time you're spending out here. Yes, you do have that second hammock, which we'll come back to, but you need to think about whether or not you would spend time out here, given the fact it's so much smaller than the other rooms. Third, and this one is quite obvious once you look at that balcony, your view from this room is pretty obstructed in terms of looking out and down. You basically won't be able to see anything down below the ship, but you will be able to look out and also look up. So depending on where you're cruising, if you are in, for example, Alaska, then that's not going to be a problem, because if you're in somewhere like the Inside Passage, there's going to be lots of mountains that are rising up for you to look at, rather than things for you to look at down in the water. So just bear in mind that this is an obstructed cabin, but you can see clearly in this video just how obstructed it is, so hopefully that'll help you to make a decision. Fourth, let's talk about that extra hammock. Yes, you do get a second hammock out here versus what you would get in a standard sea terrace cabin, but it's really important that you think about whether or not you're actually going to benefit from it. Personally, I'm not convinced that 2 people could lie in those hammocks simultaneously. I really wish that I'd tried that now while I was on the ship, but the space does look far too narrow to be able to do that. If you have cruised in this type of cabin, please let me know in the comments, because it's an outstanding question that I'm dying to have answered. So can 2 people lie in those hammocks on the balcony at the same time? Let me know. Fifth, think about the door going out to your balcony. This one might sound strange, but in most cabins on board a Virgin Voyages cruise ship, the door that takes you from the cabin area to the balcony will be a sliding door. That means that you can have the door fully open, fully closed, or anywhere in between. That allows for really simple things, like when I wake up in the morning and I'm getting ready to go out, I really like hearing the ocean hitting off the side of the cruise ship, and I like hearing the waves. The door on this slightly smaller balcony cabin opens outwards, so the only way that you would be able to keep that open to then hear the water, for example, would be to jam something in it to keep it open. And I really don't think that the cruise line would like you doing that. So just bear it in mind. It might not be a deal breaker, but that might be something that you could find quite annoying. And the final thing that you need to think about is staying on the subject of noise. Think about whether or not your cruise ports that you're visiting during your trip are tender ports or docks that the cruise ship is able to dock at. If you're not familiar, there are some cruise ports that don't have dock facilities for cruise ships. That then means that the ship has to anchor somewhere offshore and then use small boats, usually the lifeboats, to take people ashore. Now, why would that make a difference to you in this type of cabin? Well, if you are at a tender port, then the operations to get the lifeboats off the side of the ship, get them in the water, and get them ready to start taking guests ashore can start from pretty early in the morning. That might mean that you've got mechanical noise outside your room from the early hours as they begin to get things ready. Again, might not be a deal breaker, but it's definitely worth thinking about. So hopefully this video has unpicked some of the rumours and some of the speculation that is going around all about this brand new grade of cabin. I'd love to know down in the comments what you think. Would you cruise in this type of cabin, or would you rather cruise elsewhere? I think, to be honest, my perspective is that I would cruise in this cabin if the price was right. If the price difference wasn't going to be huge to just upgrade into a regular sea terrace, I would probably do that. But personally, I'm even happy on the inside of the ship. So a lot of the points that we've spoken about here wouldn't matter too much to me because I'm more than happy in the rooms which don't even have a window. But let me know in the comments what you think. If you've enjoyed this video today, then why not come and join me over in this one? This is where I take you on board Brilliant Lady for my 24-hour media preview before she launched to the public. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you over there.